Well, welcome everybody to this wrap-up of our IEF conference. And since we planned the conference to go alongside this United Nations Summits Week and related as far as possible to the themes of the summits, it seemed useful to share a little bit about what those UN events were about and a few of the other side events that were, related to our own interests or organized by some of our members that went alongside them that are also relevant to helping us ask, where does IEF want to go from here? Can we build on what has been discussed this week in some way and plan our own activities for the future and see it gives us some guidance of where we want to go? So Monday and Tuesday of this week were the Sustainable Development Goals Summit. This is halfway through the Sustainable Development Goals process. And so there was a very high-level meeting. It was a meeting of heads of state and prime ministers and so on, who all had their statements to make in the UN General Assembly on this issue. But they, of course, started by noting that only 15% of the SDGs are on track to be met. And Secretary General said they need a global rescue plan to try to save them. They adopted a political declaration, which was already negotiated in advance and we presented to the General Assembly. And some of the governments noted that with the external shocks, the COVID pandemic, the war against Ukraine, climate change impacts have already helped to make it difficult to implement the SDGs. But other governments said they'd already stalled well before these events happened. We've never really caught up with what needs to be done. The developing countries complained about their indebtedness and unfavorable lending, the need for change in the financial architecture. Small island states asked for a multidimensional vulnerability index. So it's not just how much income they make, but other things that are relevant to being small and vulnerable to things like climate change. The leaders talked about scaling up their actions, building resistance, leaving nobody behind, applying science, technology, innovation for transformative action, and strengthening integrated policies. And they all talked about the need to rebuild trust in countries to fight misinformation, because when governments agree to things and then don't deliver on them, it's hard to trust them. On the second day of the discussion, the leaders focused on strengthening the multilateral system, mobilizing finance and investments, and the need for the UN to have the capacity to respond to these emerging global challenges, and which has to be better focusing on science and technology to accelerate action. And so the Secretary General summarized the conclusions of this 2 years debate on 7 key areas. The first, he called for mobilizing at least $500 billion for sustainable development per year. He talked about shifting the focus of the voluntary national reviews towards accountability of commitments made at the summit. He talked about strengthening food security, energy, digitalization, education, social protection, decent jobs, and biodiversity. He talked about bringing to life a global accelerator on jobs and social protection, and the need to accelerate International Monetary Fund reform. The whole global financial architecture is inappropriate for today. Then, much of the takeaways from that 2-day discussion, as summarized by the UN itself, were that now more than ever, how interconnected we are, how much more work has to be done to continue to do, to end poverty and hunger, to ensure access to healthcare, quality education, to promote gender equality and human rights, protect the environment, build sustainable infrastructure. It was pointed out that the group of 20 countries, the G20 countries, account for 80% of global emissions, but are only going to be reducing their emissions by 10% when they need to reduce by 50%. So they're far behind in their promises on climate action. So they need more action, ambition, collaboration, and timeliness, and overhaul the global financial architecture, fulfilling funding commitments, better access to technology, which is often patented and driven by profit rather than serving people, and a better dialogue and trust among states. Another important event taking place on Tuesday was a series of 3 events for a second UN charter, imagining a renewed United Nations. This was organized by the Global Governance Forum, which has been organized by Baha'is and is led by Baha'is, and it looked at issues of peace and security on the first session, it was actually said the UN is on a cliff edge with respect to warfare. One expert even said we're at the point where you should be planning what do we do after a nuclear holocaust. The day after, how do we respond if this actually happened? That the probabilities now are greater than any time they've been in history. And so we need to be planning for these things. And they also proposed that we should make the environment a fourth pillar of the UN Charter, alongside human rights, peace and security, and social and economic development, because the climate issues weren't written into the Charter, and now to be part of the UN's activities. And it was pointed out that the small states could, through thought leadership, help to bring about change. It doesn't depend only on the big countries. The second discussion was on sustainable futures, and it was pointed out that there have been lots of UN failures with poverty reduction, planetary boundaries, and climate change management, but partly because the UN is too far from the grassroots, and therefore there needs to be better ways of reaching down and getting people involved in what the UN is doing. Particularly, we need to focus on the disillusioned youth and their future, and how there needs to be some way of giving them some hope you're going ahead by trying to deliver on what has been promised with charter reform. The third section was charter reform itself, where it's pointed out that we're good on understanding the problems, but we're not so good at delivering what needs to be done. The UN Charter is built on the wrong premises. It's the charter of the victors of World War II. There's no voice for the South really in the way the UN functions. The veto is due to justification. So they looked at what can be done to try to fix the charter going towards the summit of the future next year. Then on Wednesday, the emphasis was accelerating climate action. And so this was Secretary General again called for, he said, humanity has opened the gates of hell. He likes to use nice, strong language, Secretary General. We're leaving current levels of climate action dwarfed by the scale of the challenge. He stressed that the world's poorest nations have the right to be angry about lagging ambition, lacking climate finance, and skyrocketing costs of borrowing. You can find the whole statement on the IEF website if you want to see the rest of his wonderful language about this. But the leaders' statements called for negotiating a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. They need to develop a joint energy transition partnerships. We need earlier dates for phasing out fossil fuels. The criticism of the fossil fuel companies' deceit and inaction, and their appetite for to rein in greenwashing and enhance the credibility of net zero commitments. So several speakers said that we should do much more to achieve the 1.5 degree target. Momentum is growing to adopt a goal for tripling renewable energy and double energy efficiency by 2030. So there was also talk about solidarity for decarbonization, emissions trading schemes experience could be, and trying to rein in industries like steel and cement, which are very high in their carbon emissions. And Secretary General concluded that we need to turn ambition to hope and address those who are climate doers, who should keep going, scale up their action, be work together, and take no prisoners. He had wonderful ways of phrasing things in ways that everybody said, oh, that makes sense. There was also an interesting meeting organized by the Coalition for the UN We Need. This is a coalition of many civil society organizations coordinated by Dan Perel of the BIC. And so, it talked about the need to ensure coherence of processes as they go forward to the Summit of the Future next year. There's an open letter for strengthening the United Nations that they're encouraging governance people to sign up to. There's going to be a Nairobi meeting in May with negotiations starting in January. There are various steps coming up to next year that we'd be planning for. We also finalized the People's Pact for the Future. They're going to be in a new set of regional futures forums, country and community focused dialogues. That's the kind of things IEF can be involved in. There's going to be a country dialogue or community focused dialogue. What should some of the future be doing to fix the UN? These are subjects that are really quite relevant to our own work at IEF. We need to engage youth and heads of governments in these things. There's going to be a Nairobi Civil Society conference proposed for May. They're putting out a bulletin for the Summit of the Future, and global policy dialogues they're going to be organizing take this ahead. So these are events that civil society is planning, where there may be ways that IEF can be involved in some way or another. Thursday was a preparatory ministerial meeting for some of the future. Unfortunately, there was no reporting of that. We don't know what they decided. They were setting out to make their plans. It was supposed to be live streamed, but it wasn't, in fact. I tried to look for it and it didn't appear on the UN live streaming. So, but they talked about the challenges of our international institutions, the need for unity around shared principles and common goals in order to take this forward. More effective global cooperation is needed, and they'll be adopting a pact for the future at the summit next year. Then there was a meeting, the last one I'm reporting on, of the Climate Governance Commission. This again is a high-level effort to try to say, how do we fix governance for climate change? They issued a statement on the 18th of September, the beginning of the week, which is available on the IEF website if you want to look at it. I'm on the steering committee, the Climate Governance Commission, and it is coordinated by IEF member Maya Groff. So we're heavily involved in the work of the commission, which is headed by Mary Robinson, former president of Ireland and head of the elders, and Johan Rockström, the leading climate scientist. People of that, former heads of state, are involved in the commission. So it's a very high-level process to try to they're preparing a more detailed report for COP28 later this year. And they discussed about how to involve the public in what they're taking forward, holding leaders accountable for the gaps in pollution action and governance, the need for working groups to take this forward after their report, and much more education on these issues, grounding all of this in nature, encouraging hope, the positive movements going forward. And there's a Mobilizing an Earth Governance Alliance in which IEF is a partner that is going to be launched in November to take this forward. So that's what happened on the other UN side and the other civil society side during the week, that we're already involved in, and we'll try to take this forward as we go forward. And now we can share what IEF did in its own conference during the week. Thank you.
All right, Arthur said a lot. Someone's got to have questions, ideas. Please chime in. Nava.
Yeah, so I thought it was really interesting what you shared, the observation that the UN is too far removed from the grassroots, and that there needs to be a better way of connecting with, people at the local level. And I just wanted to bring this up kind of as a conversation starter for everyone, for you, Arthur, since you attended these, to kind of, I guess, brainstorm like how do we correct that issue, and what can we do about it? What can the organizations we're involved in do about it?
Well, for instance, one suggestion was made, the World Federalist Movement is one of the partners also in this mobilizing for global governments. And they said they're going to be organizing model UN events at the local level with students to debate what should some of the future do. Actually put that on the agenda. So you're at the United Nations, you're meeting next year to reform the UN system. Look at some of their documents available on what the plans are and what the issues are. It'd be very easy then to organize a discussion among students in a model UN or in some other way, and so that they can be directly involved in that. There's a lot of effort now to bring the youth into the UN system itself and to create a representative for youth and so on and so forth. So there will be increasing possibilities for youth to take part. And so these are possible. And then, of course, many of the issues that are being discussed can be issues to discuss also in our communities themselves. The work that we've done, and we'll hear a report about it on the solidarity, accountability, and community. Some of the examples of community discussion, the issues that the UN is debating can also be considered. What do we think in our community about what the UN is doing, or how does the UN affect what we're trying to do to address some local social actions, to address some issues that we are facing? Is this something related to what the UN is doing? So we can help to build those bridges between the global and the local.
But I think that we can do a lot on the local level to raise awareness about the need of to have a strengthened multilateral system, and for the need of environmental governance on a global level, because depending on where we are, people are not aware of the need for that, or they are resistant because of some prevailing ideologies. So the Baha'i teachings are so clear about world governance and about a just world governance and about the equality, and then at the same time about delegating authority to the lowest part, like to the local level, and empowering local people at the same time. So it will not be a totalitarian system, but I think we can contribute in our public discourse, as well as in the Baha'i community, raise the importance of environmental issues and how to connect them, how to connect the Baha'i teachings with environmental issues and how to address them.
I see there are two comments in the chat from Bella Anna suggesting the need to connect with our cosmic consciousness. This is very close to the Baha'i concept of unity and diversity, unity of humanity, that we're all part of one single global system today, and that we need to be conscious of the fact that there is a divine plan for achieving world unity and advancing civilization, being conscious of how we're all connected with each other. And so, and that's, we see the Sustainable Development Goals, these other UN activities, as steps in that process. And in fact, we're told in the Baha'i writings that we're not going to be the ones going to bring, might say the lesser peace, the political peace in the world. We have to be helping all the actors outside in society to overcome their differences and to come together and to work together for addressing these problems. As we move towards a deeper spiritual understanding of our basic purpose and where we need to go. Mark Griffin has also asked about reaching the goals in the second half of the plan. I think yes, certainly, even in the Baha'i plans, we often race at the end to try to meet the goals. I think the problem with the Sustainable Development Goals is that they involve such fundamental transformations in society, and changing infrastructure and changing, political, all sorts of systems. Those are not things that can be done very easily, and they take time to put in place, to learn from, and to build better. And we also know that climate change is happening much faster than anybody expected, and therefore, we don't have, much time to make the fundamental transformations that are needed. It's becoming too urgent, and the longer we wait, the longer we delay, the more we will suffer very serious impacts, from our delay. So, while that might seem logical that you catch up later, we know that science is saying we don't have time to catch up later. We've got to do it right now.
Well, I think it comes down to our involvement on the local level, that what everybody can do. And the best thing what you can do, I think, is give people hope. That's what my own experience, and I was very touched by Ismael Velasco 2 seminars back, I think, who told how we went to Greenland, where the highest suicide rate is. And he introduced a play which was based on the 7 valleys. Our person who is looking for his beloved, and he's got being hit by other people, and he has a lot of resistance. Finally, he climbs on the wall and he falls off the wall, and then he meets his beloved, so he's happy again. So that all gives us in a nutshell that, and he did it in meme play because he doesn't speak Inuit. It's for the Inuit people, and he was there only 1 month. I mean, he gave the idea that most people now are very sad, oppressed, sad, down, that the government doesn't work, that climate change will change everything. So we have to give them in some way hope that we have to continue what we are doing, trying to connect people with each other and give a good message. And I really recommend see this video from him. And in his own, he succeeded to, it was in 1 month, to come at national TV, and all the schools have seen his performance. So if we try that kind of thing, each one of us, I mean, then we can have really impact. Because on the high level, we cannot do so much. Only people like Arthur can do that, and a handful more. But we are on the grassroots, so we should work there. That's what I would like to say.
Just to read a few of the questions that have been here in the chat. So in an interview on CNN this week at the UN, another spokesman person, Al Gore, in regard to climate change, said, nature is taking a hike through the book of Revelation, and that fossil fuel companies use the sky as an open sewer. Perhaps if anyone has any thoughts about what has just been described here.
Well, I think, the reference to the book of Revelation and the catastrophes of the last days, it's sort of Al Gore is sort of pointing out that we are creating human-caused catastrophes very close to some of those that were predicted if we don't rein in our very short-term perspective. And of the second comment about fossil fuels coming, the sky's an open sewer, I think the whole economy uses the environment as an open sewer. It's not, in all its different ways, whether it be plastics, whether it be pollutants from agriculture and so on. The whole present economic system is taking us to that level of catastrophe, and that's why such fundamental change is needed. And that's why the UN debates this week, the governments are always very positive about setting a very high goal. They're not nearly as good at following through to actually rein in these negative influences in their countries with of corruption and financial influences and all the rest. So I think those quotes really do raise some of the challenges we face in trying to make the transition, trying to resist these negative forces and to move in a positive direction.
Thank you, Arthur. Quanta Dawn Light also made a comment about the US military, and she mentions that US military's carbon footprint is enormous. Like corporate supply chains, it relies upon an extensive global network of container ships, trucks, and cargo planes to supply its operations with everything from bombs to humanitarian aid and hydrocarbon fuels. Is there any comment that you have on this point about the US military, or about any work that has been involving military activities around the world?
I think they're at the extreme end of destruction rather than construction. I mean, their whole purpose is to destroy. And because they sort of hide behind military security, secretiveness, all those impacts are not even calculated in the United States common footprint. They set the military aside as something else, that's not even part of their calculations. So it's at the full extreme of things going in the wrong direction. But as long as we don't address this fundamental issue about the purpose of the United Nations to bring peace and security, to bring about disarmament, to give governments confidence in some of the others, they don't have to prepare for war. And its failure to do that, partly because it was poorly designed to begin with, the veto of the 5 permanent members, means that it has not met that need. And therefore, we have this, this absurdity of so much of the world's resources going into the military side of things and destruction, rather than, addressing the fundamental problems of all of humanity today. And it's the tragedy of today that we haven't designed a system to solve this problem yet, although it is promised. But unfortunately, the promise that we have in the Baha'i writings is that if we don't do it through consultative will, it will come through terrible disasters.
Thank you, Arthur.
Let's have a brief comment from Winona and Juliet, and then we're going to move to our next summary. Winona.
Thank you. We know from experience and from documents that we have that we live in a very materialistic time in the world. And as Arthur's just pointed out, we don't know the costs, but there are plenty of costs that are not calculated in what we pay at the countertop for whatever goods we buy or what the military does. So there's a book that the Agriculture Working Group is going to be studying this cycle called Pricing the Priceless by an Italian economist, if I remember correctly. So that might be something that some of you would like to participate in. The other thing is that I think we need to start our work on global governance right in our own backyard, in our spiritual assemblies, if we're Baha'is, or in the government that places that we occupy, in the influence we have in our cities, so that we get better at it, because we have a whole system of governance that has been laid out for us. And we need to understand it, and we're babies at using it on the local level, but we need to get better and better. So let's fully participate at our local level. Thank you.
I think Winona brings up the most important point about engaging our communities at the local level and our friends and our contacts. Everything, all our other Baha'i activities started, we talk about how everything is important to start from the grassroots. This is no different. And global consciousness requires all of us to actually change how we think about things. That's trench work. Juliet's going to make our final comment, and then we're going to do some more summaries.
Thank you. Thank you. I love what's being said. And how do you say, piggybacking on this engagement at all levels when we walk out the door, and when we're in our LSAs or any group that we might be in, we can engage with bringing it up. I'm just thinking of one strand, which, because you got to pick something. Fiber, for instance, there's Fiber Shed that people can Google. It's started out of California, USA. And just thinking about very, very, very local about what we put on our bodies, what we buy for our friends and for babies and so forth, what that impact is, was mentioned, pricing the priceless. It would be astronomical, and we probably couldn't ultimately do it when it comes to the, say, polyesters and the oceans and plastics per se, going all the way down to the sediments. There's a book, Thicker Than Water, that is very interesting, written by a science journalist. People can look at. But I think, as we do this, and I'm thinking about this, it keeps coming back to really redesigning our whole way of life and consulting, as Winona said, with others. And we have good guidelines. How do we do this? And just start. I'm trying, like buying cotton. It's not always easy to be true to one's ideals, but it's definitely worth the effort. But I don't think, I know I can't do it alone, and that's why I'm here today. And I thank you so much for all that you're doing. But again, I think we have to redesign as we engage, give that hope that redesigning is not only possible, but necessary. Thank you.
Thanks, Juliet. And Quanta and Juliet, you both mentioned resources. Sorry, Winona and Juliet, you both mentioned resources. I think there was a book club or discussion group mentioned by Winona and Juliet. If you want to mention any of those books, please put that information in the chat. Oh, Winona already did. All right, that's great. Okay, let's do 2 more summaries of this week's events. We'll do some back-to-back here. I will tell you about the event that happened last Saturday. We had a bit of a roundtable show and tell of local efforts. We had Bill and Erin Kelly in Ottawa, Canada, talking about how they educate homeowners on how to make their houses greener and lower their carbon footprint. And they had resources and educational efforts. They have, they also had they sponsor, and you'll see come up in the webinar, in a future IEF webinar, they have an ongoing devotional / educational event on the environment, where they have a rotating lecture series and music and devotional, and they put it all online during COVID. And they've got that attracting local participation in Ottawa, and also a bit around the globe. We had someone from the IEF Youth Task Force, Elsa Deschmuck, talked about what our youth task force has been up to. And Anthony Vadraska in Maryland is working on community gardens and engaging youth and children and the community to enjoy gardening and bringing plants home from the community garden, and making recyclable paper cups for their seedlings, and all sorts of fun stuff. So I'll put in the chat a link to the IEF YouTube page, where we are posting all of the recordings from last week, including the event I just described, as well as all the other ones are gonna pop up there pretty soon here as well. That was Saturday's event, and Nava's gonna tell us about which one, Nava?
About Wednesday's event, which was on the global environmental governance. So kind of the basis for this conversation was that it's now become evident that only a global environmental institution, which is mandated to adopt binding legislation based on scientific evidence to enforce decisions, has the potential to prevent eco-catastrophe. And so in moving forward, one of the things that was mentioned was that it's important to remember that, you know, in the creation of this body that would be in charge of global environmental governance, it has to encompass not only governments, but also non-state actors. So this means individuals, this means multinational corporations as well. And then another interesting discussion that came up during this webinar was about the gender dimension of climate change, which I had actually never heard of before. And we were told by Tahira Mathi, who's an interfaith liaison in South Africa, that this gender dimension of climate change remains very under-researched. And what it means is basically that women bear a disproportionate burden during climate catastrophes due to their higher representation among the world's poor. And they usually also have a greater reliance on climate vulnerable natural resources. So when there's a climate catastrophe, this vulnerability is exacerbated, and women who are the primary agricultural workers and resource procurers often have to work very tirelessly. A lot of times also as a consequence, young girls, the daughters of these mothers, have to leave school to now assist their mothers with these added pressures because of these climate catastrophes. So in moving forward, it's very crucial that this area is kind of researched more and addressed, and that we integrate these gender sensitive strategies into climate policies and projects. And something that also compounds this issue is that historically women have been underrepresented in environmental policy leadership positions. So this is not making the issue, you know, any easier to deal with. So that's also another thing, is to make sure that women are included in this leadership at the top, and also to prioritize gendered language and inclusivity, both at the international level, but also at the national level for climate policies.
The climate crisis hits, you know, the less economically developed world more than does Europe and North America and other places where we've got all sorts of carbon producing tech toys. Robert.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to pick up on what I think Juliet said at the end of the last segment. We need to redesign our whole way of life, which I firmly believe. And I think it starts with the Baha'i community. I think if we just assume we can do like everybody else, we'll hop in our car, we'll go to plant trees, or we'll go to our Baha'i activities, we'll use throwaway plastic, we'll do all the stuff that everybody else does, but we're Baha'is, we're doing it for a good cause, so it's okay. It's not okay, as we all know. And so I think we need to figure out, how do we carpool? How do we ride bikes? How do we deal with feast and holy days in some pretty far-flung communities, and use Zoom creatively and all these things, so we can be a genuine model at the local level as part of this grassroots kind of approach. Anyway, I'm working on that in terms of our city of Gaithersburg, Maryland, 70,000 people in this, with a multiple kind of neighborhoods and this kind of thing that have to be some rich, some poor, some, you know, and how do you involve other faith communities? Partnering is a critical part of this with other faith communities and other nonprofit organizations, such as my Rotary Club. Lots to do. Thank you.
One thing I've been thinking about for the last several years is, what do we really mean by moderation? I can be really blunt on this, but I think I will say it. I think when you look at the Western lives, Christine, you're laughing. When you look at Western lifestyle, I mean, are we using it as an excuse that that's moderation with all the things we have? You know, and I agree completely that we have to totally change our lifestyle. But if you go out to other places in the world, as many of you have, most places, you know, their lifestyle is very much simpler. And yet there's many that is so simple, they're hardly surviving. So I think that in terms of the Western countries, or the more industrial and quote modernized, or whatever you want to call it, I think that's something that people really need to evaluate from an individual standpoint, to a family standpoint, to a society standpoint, and to a national standpoint, because we know that the planet is well over its capacity in so many avenues of the biosphere that, you know, what are we doing? Are we kind of fooling ourselves and saying we can have all these things because we want them? Or are we really seeing what might be a more feasible lifestyle? Or are we going to be forced into it just by lack of resource limits and other things? But for the Western society, I think that's something that maybe we need to be look at in a little bit more depth and with a little bit more honesty.
Thank you, Carol. I also wanted to mention about the question that you raised earlier, and I think that was so interesting in terms of migration crisis and environmental refugees. I see that in a local level, living in London, UK, I see around my neighborhood so many Ukrainians that moved to here, or so many Turkish people that moved after the environmental crisis there as well, and the earthquake. And so you were asking about, like, about consideration for the needs of environmental refugees. And I think that if anyone has any points about that, it would be great as well to be explored. Yes, Arthur.
Well, this is one of my specialties, in fact. And you know, certainly the United Nations has been, you know, looking at issues of migration and refugees as a whole. You know, the part of the problem is that there is no international legislation for climate displaced people. You know, under the Refugee Convention, you are a refugee because you're being persecuted, your life is in danger, and when the person is, you can go back again. When sea level rises and your country vanishes, you are displaced, but there's no international legal framework for such thing. And for many years in my work with small island developing states, you know, I've been raising the issue that there needs to be a whole new convention to deal with, you know, the migrations to be caused by climate displacement, whether it be by droughts or floods or sea level rise or whatever. The estimates are that we'll see 900 million displaced people in the next few decades. That's 1/10 of the whole world's population. So the issues that we have today over a few migrants here and there are nothing compared with what's going to be happening. I'm moderating, and I've helped to organize a webinar on the 12th of October from the G20 Interfaith Forum and Kai said, two interfaith organizations on climate change and the importance of indigenous knowledge, looking specifically about not only the spiritual dimension of what we're losing with climate change, but also how do we deal with those displaced people? How do we help them retain their culture and values, even if they're forcibly displaced, if they lose their national territory? In the Marshall Islands, that Carol knows very well, you are among those that may go underwater entirely. So these are critical issues that need to be discussed at the UN, require new legislation, but it's a sensitive issue because it's so politically charged now that it's very difficult to get movement forward on it, but it's badly needed, and it's going to get worse and worse in the years ahead. So you'll see us talking about more and more as we go forward, because I'm so involved in it.
So perhaps that's a point, dear Arthur, that should be as one of the responses to where do we go from here.
Cedric.
Yes, so just to build on Carol's comments, so I'm living in Sweden, and even within Sweden, we have this kind of this paradox of those people which are the most concerned about the environment and thinking the most about the environment, and putting solar panels on the roof and buying electric cars and buying organic milk. But still, those people are actually among those which have the biggest carbon footprint, because they have the money to make those choices. It means they're having a car, they're having a house that needs to be heated, and some of these people that really are not concerned in their everyday life about the environment at all, because they have other questions, more important questions, just getting enough money to feed a family living in the suburbs. You know, they're taking the metro to work, and then they have a much smaller carbon footprint. So I think it's something really we need to change in some way our idea of how we are living our lives. We can't just substitute everything, buying electric cars, and we actually need to decrease consumption, and we can't substitute everything.
A lot of what Cedric said, I'd like to continue on, but just a little bit, because, you know, there's a lot of things that's going on in the world today, and we should be aware of them. I live in Ukraine. You probably know there's a war going on here. And I live in an area that's surrounded by the war, by missiles, by whatever. And it's not going to be going away, not next year, and probably not the year after that. It's likely it's not going to be going away. So what's that going to do with the rest of the world, you know, as this continues? One of the things that I believe we should be thinking about is, you know, we are seeing activities throughout the world, not just in the United States, but in other places around the world, where we are running into lots of problems. Food supply, for example, we know it's coming. It's in the news. If you read the news, that in the next 10, 20, 30 years, we're going to be out of food in Africa, for example. It's already in the news. It's being done by military, by people. And of course, I listened to an extremely wonderful, let's say, discussion by the UN Secretary Guterres, Antonio, I guess his name, Guterres. He gave a wonderful talk about the fact that, you know, the UN is not doing what it was supposed to do by 2030. You know, in fact, it seems to be moving far behind that. And he keeps talking about it. There's a lot of things. So, I mean, as I'm thinking here in Ukraine, I'm thinking about the community and how we're going to live. I do believe we're going to be living a different kind of a life than we have been living. That's what I keep telling myself and my wife and my friends. We can live much more simply. We don't need to have so much money. We can have a smaller, you know, reason activity. But when we watch the United States, oh, everybody seems to be so well and so well off. Well, I'm American, by the way, but I didn't live there since about 50 years ago. But if we go down to Africa or we go to India, we're going to see how bad these things are going to be developing in the coming 10, 20, 30 years. It's for sure. It's in the news everywhere. So I think we have to remember that we're going forward, and we really, it's not just going to be Baha'is are going to be doing it. It's not just Baha'i communities. In my personal opinion, and things that we've been studying throughout, you know, different Baha'i activities, I'm on the NSA here, of course, when we're talking about, Baha'i activities, we don't say for the future, we're just going to be Baha'i communities, it's going to be working for the future of the world. It's going to be Baha'is and other people who we're going to be associated with in the future. So I think these are all really, really important things. In my head, I can't say, oh, I can tell you exactly what's going to go on, because I can only really put it together for the way in which I'm living in this part of the world. By the way, I'm working in Africa today, in Zimbabwe. That's what I've been doing for much of my life, but I live in Africa, not enough. Fortunately, even though my wife says I can't go back there. So I guess that's enough.
Thank you, Gary. We're going to hear summaries from Cedric and again from Nama from 2 more events, and then we'll keep talking. I'm going to, we've got a couple comments, but we'll hold off till the next pause in between summaries. So go ahead, Cedric.
Thank you. We just summarize the panel discussion, trust and accountability, bringing values into our future, which was held this Monday. And this was a panel discussion between Daniel Perel, who is representative to the United Nations for the Baha'i International Community, and Sylvia Karlsson-Wenkhuizen, who is associate professor at Wageningen University. And this panel discussion, it was focused on the prerequisites and foundations needed for the summits of the future, but also global governance in general to succeed. And the panel was moderated by David Manham. And Daniel, he introduced the discussion by introducing a key challenge in global governance, which is a lack of trust. And he gave this really interesting example of, for example, how all of us in this meeting, that's Monday, but also today, we need to trust so many things for this to happen. We trust that technology will work, we trust that people will show up on time, and in this way in our everyday lives, we just are so used to trusting people. But on the global level, there is this growing mistrust, both between nations and between leaders and those that are being governed. And this is especially true for the younger generations, which are having more and more of a mistrust against the government all over the world. And the challenge is now, how can we rebuild this trust? Just by ensuring that every promise is made is also as a promise that is being kept. So in the same way as we hold people accountable in our personal lives, we should also be able to hold people accountable on a global level. And then Sylvia, she continued by presenting a quote by Abdul Baha. Today, no state in the world is in a condition of peace or tranquility. Security and trust have vanished among the people. And she continued by explaining how today the current global goal-setting dynamic is really, in a way, dysfunctioning, because the states are setting very ambitious goals, and they're not really contributing to its meeting these goals. And then the evaluation of the results usually is only superficial and is soon forgotten, and then even more ambitious goals are set. And 2 of the values which are lacking in this process is truthfulness and trustworthiness. And then in the ensuing discussion, Daniel, Sylvia, and the rest of the attendees trying to see different possible solutions to these challenges. And one main key solution is that we need to build closer relationships to each other, even on the global level. And if we really start seeing humanity as one family and realize the same values of trust and accountability and truthfulness, which we're expecting in our everyday lives and our own families, also are needed on the international level. But it is a long and difficult process, but the panel discussion ended with this feeling of hope that this culture can be changed.
So yesterday, which was the last session, and the topic was global solidarity accounting, specifically values for well-being. So some of the key points that came out of that conversation were around ensuring the participation of people in the community. And some panelists, including one person here tonight, Jan, shared their experience with using things like questionnaires or similar materials for communities to identify which issues are most important for their well-being. And the question of well-being we've seen to really resonate with people, and it's been proven to be a very fruitful way to begin the conversation, no matter what kind of well-being we're talking about, whether it be economic, environmental, or social. And another recurring theme, which was actually already brought up tonight, was that we've seen the importance of a hopeful vision and how much people need hope in this time. So we've touched on it a little bit already, but I think it's a really important question to ask: how can we inspire hope? And how can this hope spur people on to take action and become engaged even more in this discourse? And, you know, some things Cedric also raised about trust amongst each other. I think these all are very interconnected, and it's definitely something that we can address ourselves in our communities locally, and something that might deserve a bit of conversation.
I like that comment about hope. Humans fail to have motivation if they don't have hope. We're not going to solve this without motivation. So that suddenly becomes essential. Christine.
Yes, now you really challenged my thoughts here. I think this is really important to emphasize, like for us, that we have this hopeful attitude, and at the same time have a scientific and realistic stance on matters, and that we try to convey both in our communications, which is not that easy, because when you just talk about the science and about the state of the world and you are truthful, it's really dire. There is really no hope. But when you look at the human potential and at the era in which we live in, the overall human history and destiny, we do have hope, at least for the long-term future of humanity. And I think what we need to do is somehow among each other, like try to help each other to have that hopeful language when we communicate. And the BIC with Daniel Perel in the meetings he conducts, he's able to somehow has this hopeful way of communicating things. And I think we can learn from that.
Thank you. This is actually a very interesting point, Christine. And I'm just trying to reflect as well on the different points that so far have been raised. And this point about redesigning our culture, it's something that we have to continuously think about, and think about this coherence as well in terms of our work, our families, the way that we engage with the community, how we receive people that come from the migration crisis. There will be different aspects that we're going to be addressing, and this point of global governance and aspects of truthfulness and trustworthiness. They're so much the foundation of all the basic connections that we have with each other. And if this is not present in the international level, in the national level, we really have to start analyzing how we can evolve more in a grassroots level these qualities and attitudes. And I was also thinking about the point of unity, that it is so much easier to be united. Our noble characters, they are much easily inclined to be united than to be disunited. And I think we need to make extra effort actually to be disunited. Animals very easily come together. And I think that this is also our nature. And maybe on this point that someone has raised a little bit earlier about the most great peace and about global governance, perhaps if Arthur, you have any comments about that, or anyone in the panel here, I mean, in the audience. Everyone's the panel today.
Well, I think it's so important when any time you're planning for the future to have a vision of where you want to go. And if you don't know where you want to go, you will sort of stumble blindly, tripping here and there, and not really go in circles, not go anywhere. So having a vision of the future is always something that can give a sense of direction and also give a sort of sense of hope. So, the Baha'i vision of the future is an amazingly glorious one for the long-term future. But of course, we're looking at a cycle of 500,000 years, and even the Baha'i teachings are 4,000 years. So this is far more in the future than a quarterly court report or a 5-year plan or something of that sort. And so, while clearly we know that in the short term, we may go through extreme difficulties because we've got to roll up the old world order before we put a new one in its place. It's with a Persian carpet, you don't put a new carpet on top of an old carpet. You don't roll the old carpet first, so then you lay out the new one. And so, in the same way, what we're seeing is the disintegration of the old system, and it's more and more showing its failures and its irrationalities and its stupidity and its evilness and all the other things that go with a lack of any kind of spiritual values. And we know that our real purpose is to be replacing that with a whole new process from the bottom up, as you said, of creating cohesion in our communities, reaching out to others, sharing some positive views with them, getting them to join in some constructive activities, sharing some values and going forward. And that's the best security for whatever may happen in the years ahead. So we have the combination of that long-term vision of where human potential will take us once we get beyond this period of adolescence in our human society, which is often full of violence and conflict, and can achieve a maturity where we can really move forward and build a wonderful new civilization. So there is a lot of hope there. I mean, I'm 80 years old, more than 80 years old, and I'm still hopeful and will continue to be hopeful as long as I can, simply because I know that that's where we're going, and that the difficulties we're facing now are part of the growing pains that we have to go through to achieve a better future. Thank you.
Yeah, individuals learn through making mistakes. I don't think society is going to be any different as we build our build our global maturity. Nava.
Yes, I was just thinking of something in response to some of the thoughts that Christine was sharing. And I was thinking that I think sometimes having hope right now, like at least for young people, is very difficult because the task at hand is so daunting and so large. And, if we're talking about, one of the standards by which we're measuring our improvements in climate change, this, plus 2 degrees Celsius increase in the global temperature, I think, we think there's, a lot of evidence right now showing that we may not reach that by the year that we were supposed to reach that by. And so people are saying, what's the point if that's not going to happen? Like, what are all our efforts for? And I was watching this interview with President Obama, and his daughter, who's now a university-aged youth, was saying, I was speaking about this topic with my friends, and they were all saying, I don't think we're going to prevent this, plus 2 degrees Celsius increase, and kind of what's the point? And what he shared was along the lines of, okay, maybe we won't be able to prevent that, but we can still prevent a lot of things. We can make sure that what we're doing will then mean like Bangladesh is not underwater, so I think we sometimes think about, well, now the point that we're at, we can't do everything, we can't reverse everything, we can't fix everything, but I think that there's still huge impact to be had. And I think also in, maintaining hope, that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that just because we can't reverse everything or improve everything doesn't mean our impact can't be significant.
2 quick points. We need to embrace the indigenous worldview. This is a wonderful book, Restoring the Kinship Worldview. Indigenous Voices introduced 28 precepts for rebalancing life on planet Earth. I'm trying to learn from the indigenous cultures in the Piscataway Nation, Native American, used to own this land where I'm living in Gaithersburg, Maryland. I need to learn from them and many others. And the other point is that I was thinking, how would I describe my community and myself? And I live in a fairly well-to-do community. And so some people would ask if I'm rich. And I would say, no, I'm not rich, but I'm well off. And because the meaning of well off means in a favorable situation or circumstance. That should apply to everyone. And then I realized, well, off is a negative term. I need to be well on. And that means an embracing the world in my community and a different methodology and a different way of seeing things. One other quick thing, look at the butterfly's transformation from a caterpillar going through the chrysalis. All the caterpillar cells dissolve within the chrysalis and they are transformed into a beautiful butterfly. Transformation is key in the Baha'i faith, so we should learn from the butterfly, caterpillar to butterfly, and our own faith. Thank you.
I'm also nearly 80, so I have some experience with trying to tell with people. And to my opinion, the only thing is, if you want to touch people, it's only that you can tell them your long-term vision, that you believe that the really peace will come on earth. I've experienced that that's the only ways they want to listen to you. Because when you start, for example, once I started to explain the book written by Arthur and the others about the world government, so then explain all the things which are in that. And then you see after 1 minute, say totally become deaf, they don't want to hear it. But if you really, one lady was touched by the conviction I had that real peace will come on earth. Said, oh, that's not many people believe that. So then you can have a good starting point to go on with your discussions. So we for us, it's just so granted that we know all these things, but for the general public, it's not. So, and that's what we should transfer to the people. So then they might maybe listen. So that's short, in short. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's a very good point, and perhaps for us to think about the concept of community resilience and individual resilience as well, and how when we focus on spiritual and value-based principles, how much we can actually contribute to those that have mental health issues due to disasters or that are displaced, or and there was also one question that was raised earlier. Can't remember who raised this question, so apologies for that. But it was mentioning the question: how can we support narratives in the complexities of reports that exclude a variety of people? So I think that when we can actually focus in that people have different. They are going to have different realities. One is going to be the result of the migration crisis. The other one is going to be a result of mental health issues. Today, I was going to the doctor appointment with my daughter, and there was a casualty in the train close to the station where I was stopping, and I was just thinking, wow, there's so many of this, so many people. They are actually they are very affected, either because of the pandemic or because of different aspects of climate change impact as well. So and the other point as well that was raised by Winona is the best to do is to cope. That is different from having hope. And in the moment of crisis, it is hard to actually think of hope. But perhaps this is the point that we can have a very quick discussion about moments of crisis and having hope in the moments of crisis.
Arthur.
I wanted to follow up the two previous comments because so many indigenous worldviews include a vision of a future of unity, of you coming together. In fact, there was a Baha'i whom I knew in my childhood, basically, who was deeply involved in the First Nations traditions in America, to the point where he thought, well, he would try to collect all the different First Nations visions of coming together in unity, which he found in different traditions. And he had a dream when he was young about, because he was raised next to the Sioux Reservation in South Dakota, and he'd dream about, these, he'd see the Indians as, drunk in their rags as he saw them, and suddenly become brave young warriors in beautiful buckskins, and all the tribes come there and march up the rainbow in unity. And so he wrote this book called Warriors of the Rainbow, which collected all these. This is back in the 1940s and 50s, and that became the foundation of the Greenpeace philosophy. The history points to this book by two Baha'is showing how this concept of unity among many different indigenous peoples was the foundation of their values. So this work on digging back the values of many cultures is all part of what Baha'is have been doing for generations now. He was my inspiration as well, as in my Baha'i children's classes. So and so I think we can bring together those visions of unity and find them in the different perspectives of peoples around us, and show how they're all leading us in that direction, which is the direction of the maturity of the human race. Thank you.
Thanks, Arthur. We're going to use that as a bridge to go to our final summary from Christine.
All right. I will give you a brief report on the event Community Engagement and Diverse Representation for Social Transformation, which took place on Tuesday. The panelists shared experiences of how underrepresented groups at the local level have been the protagonists of social change in their community. They told stories from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, from Armenia, Fiji, Uganda, and Greenland. In our world drowning in crises, their stories provided hope and a direction for where we can go. I will share with you two key points. The first is the importance of access to knowledge and education. Alda from Armenia told us about a project where youth and children reduce carbon and air pollution by collecting bio-waste in their neighborhood and composting it. These young people learn, while participating in the project, how to compost and how to use the composted material to grow plants. Austin reported about a big project of saving coral reefs in the Pacific. In many years of dedicated work, he has empowered young and indigenous people with scientific knowledge on how to save warm water resistant corals and how to propagate them. Christian and Emmanuel explained how access to knowledge and education helped women in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in Uganda to improve their personal lives with sustainable agricultural methods, and how this contributed to the well-being of the whole community. Emmanuel told us the story of Sylvia. Her participation in the Preparation for Social Action program helped her acquire knowledge in planting crops and in math, which enabled her to create a business. The second key point came from an answer to a question about the sustainability of efforts toward improving the well-being of a community. Ismail explained that in the many projects he has been involved in, the ones that were sustained had spiritual content. People who are spiritually motivated stay with the process over a long time. So the sustainability and longevity of a project depends on its spiritual foundation. And these are the two key points.
Thanks, Christine. We've got about 10 more minutes before the 90-minute cutoff for this event. I've posted again the link to the playlist on YouTube, which will soon have all of the recordings from the whole week, all of our conference events. And we've been talking so much about book recommendations. I also thought I'd post the Association for Baha'i Studies reading group list for autumn. There's a lot of climate related book clubs if you're in a reading mood. Any more comments? I loved all this talk about hope and how the Baha'i faith specifically has such a glorious vision for the future. We're not making things up. We've got a real message of hope, and that's sorely needed from the world. And something very uniquely that a religion can offer this mostly secular discourse going on in the world. And especially our religion has just so much to say about the glory of the future and the human race, the fact that we'll be working together, but there's always growing pains. Humans like to learn through trials and tribulations instead of Winona.
I don't know if Carol would like to offer something, but the difference between hope and cope, where she's lived or is still living, I'm not sure. It must be huge. I would love to hear from her if she's willing.
When I was out in the village, there was something was kind of interesting because I was adopted by a family in 1969. So I still had very close ties with this family. So I was staying with one of my sisters. She's the youngest of a very large family. And she was asking me about it and her vision. I mean, what she thought climate change meant was a big wave coming over. And I said, no, it'll be the groundwater coming up and saturating the land. And that means all the vegetation will die. And then, of course, you'd be living on a piece of sand. And I think that a lot of people are becoming scared about it. There's huge migration to the US. Usually people have said in the past, this happened really after the 2000s. It really wasn't going on too much before then. They usually say they go for education and for medical needs. And that's true. That's still true. But I think people are, and the government hasn't really, my understanding is that they say, no, we're staying no matter what. Of course, that isn't totally realistic. And this has been a couple of years now, but I was at a gathering and I asked some of the people that were at this gathering, I said, is anyone in the government actually talking about the reality that these islands are going to disappear? Their atolls are totally flat. And they said they're just starting to really broach that idea, knowing that it's absolutely most likely, but being afraid to really go there. In terms of the Baha'is, we're just focusing on what's that called? Intensive growth activities, and that goes up and down, of course. But in terms of the hope, I mean, in terms of Baha'is, that's, I think, where we find the hope. And Marshallese are very, in my mind, they're very positive, basically, and they don't complain very much. And so they kind of take life in stride. You know, death is part of life. And it's not to say they don't get sad when someone dies. So I think their whole approach to life is a little bit different. And yes, the Western materialism has come into the two urban areas on a lesser extent than the US. And I've seen those changes. And there's positive things in that, and there's negative things in that, of course. So I think that most of the time we kind of ignore it until we have a super high tide, or what do you call them, a king tide, and then it starts washing up on places. We haven't gone under yet in certain, but we've certainly seen a lot of erosion and changes. So I think kind of maybe everywhere where climate change has really begun to touch people, that they're trying to be hopeful and yet kind of trying to ignore it too at the same time. I don't know if that helps at all.
I know it's getting late and I'll keep it short, but I'm glad I could participate in all the seminars this week. The time worked out. And one of the things that always resonates with me is hearing stories of what people are doing to help others. And so I just wanted to share, there's been a lot of discussion the last couple of days about hope and the importance of having hope. But I think whatever you can do on a small level in terms of an action will go really far. So instead of just thinking, I'm going to have hope, you can give hope by doing something for somebody. So all around the world, I know some people tonight have said, maybe if we change our lifestyle and we do this and this, then maybe the people in Bangladesh won't be flooded. Well, I was just in Bangladesh for several years. It's already flooding, and people are already dealing with the consequences of climate change. I'm now in Pakistan, where 2/3 of the country was flooded last year. And so what we are doing with our work is we are helping people to adapt. And all around the world, there's little things that you can do, whether you can teach somebody how to grow a different vegetable in their yard that's more heat tolerant or drought tolerant, or you help somebody to, if there's a heat extreme, how to get out of the heat for some period of time. So I just think, people will forget, I think, the things that we say, but they will never forget the things we do. And I think anything that we can do, even in small ways, to help people to adapt, because I think we're in an adaptation mode here in Bangladesh. The climate change crisis was so large that it's not a development issue, it's a humanitarian assistance issue. So I think anything that we could do to help somebody to actually do something, I think will go a long way. So I just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Keith. Christine.
I was just thinking that we need to somehow bring out the key points that were brought up today, and I will start. I don't have everything in my memory, but I think what struck me following just a little bit the UN meetings and listening to Arthur's key points, and then participating in the events of the IEF conference this week, I was really impressed how these points all came together. Everyone who is conscious seems to, all these people seem to talk about the same things. They are concerned about the same matters. And these points are repeated from different perspectives in different ways, and explained with different statistics sometimes, or facts. But it's all about the finding the solidarity with everyone on the planet, building global governance and the prerequisites for it, trust, which is trust, and then the having action and not just empty promises in international agreements. There are many others. They don't come to my mind, but Arthur might jump in. I'm sure he has many more on his mind. But it's really amazing how people, not only Baha'is, have come to this conclusion that trust is important, that hope is important, and that urgent action is important, and that we have to work together to achieve that.
I think that's clearly what IEF has been trying to do in its own way. And I think you find members of IEF in general tend to be reasonably hopeful because what they can learn in the organization. And as you say, there are many others working in the same direction. We're building partnerships. And we're finding other like-minded people working with us, reaching out to them, and I think giving them hope at the same time that we not only talk about these issues, we actually do things, whether it be simply putting on the table the solution to a problem so it can be considered and discussed at the international level, whether it be what we've seen in the case studies this week, doing to the local community, giving people some hope through some kind of a practical social action they can undertake. And all of these things which Baha'is are doing in general and which we try to do in the environmental area are ways of laying out the future path for all of us to do something to can maintain that hope in spite of all the challenges that are coming and continue to build a better future for all of us every day, everywhere. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for joining our discussion today.